Hello and welcome to the PFF Live Q&A. I'm Doug Kyed, joined as always by Ari Meirov and Brad Spielberger. Ari, how are you doing today?
Doing really well. I feel like every year when we get to this time of year, I go crazy how it's already week 6. We're going
Yeah.
into week 7 already. Time is flying, guys. I don't know about you, but it's going really fast.
It goes way too fast, but hey, you got one extra week this year, so it'll last a little longer for you.
That's true.
Very true. Let's kick off the conversation today talking about the first game that we watched on Sunday morning. That was the Jacksonville Jaguars beating the Miami Dolphins. The Jaguars got their first win of the season. Urban Meyer's first win as an NFL head coach. Trevor Lawrence's first win as a starting quarterback. Broke a 20-game losing streak. And I just want to quickly vent for like 10 seconds right here, is that people complain about that game. Like, they're up on Sunday morning watching that game. They complain on Sunday night watching the Seahawks game. Like, you don't have to watch the game. You don't have to complain. And if you're like us and you're getting paid to watch the game, embrace it, because no one else lives this type of blessed lifestyle to where they would be complaining about having to watch the Jaguars and Dolphins. But another good slate of games this weekend. But let's talk a little bit about the Dolphins' future, because they're now 1-5 on the season. The only team that they've beaten is the 2-4 Patriots, and that really came down to the wire. And it's kind of a shaky situation right now for the Dolphins, for their leadership up top, sitting there 1-5. And one thing that I would say just about where they are right now is that it was kind of excusable to be losing games when Jacoby Brissett was their starting quarterback. Even though Jacoby Brissett is thought to be one of the best backup quarterbacks in the NFL, still, it was a difficult situation for them. For them to then get Tua Tagovailoa back and still lose to the Jacksonville Jaguars, I don't know what happens at this point for the Dolphins, but I do think that they have to pull things together pretty quickly for there not to be changes here, by the end of the season or entering next season. All right, how do you view this situation for the Dolphins?
No, I think you hit it right. You're 100% right, Doug. When you look at the Dolphins, and especially 2 off seasons ago, when they went to that offseason, we always talked about how much cap space they have and how many draft picks they have. And they had 3 first-round picks that year. If you go back to look at what they did that offseason, look where they are right now, it was a complete failure. If you look at their free agency, Kyle Van Noy was cut after 1 year. Shaq Lawson was traded after 1 year. Eric Flowers was traded after 1 year. The Byron Jones contract, I don't think everyone would say that he's lived up to that contract. And not to mention that contract also led to Xavier Howard being unhappy. And then that draft, as I said, they had 3 first-round picks. And Tua was picked at number 5, and we're always going to talk about him. And Justin Herbert, of course, has been amazing. Their second first-round pick was Austin Jackson, who has not lived up to being a left tackle. Now he's playing left guard. And their third first-round pick was Noah Igbenogany, who has been healthy and active for most of this season. So they completely messed up that offseason. And it all comes back to management with Chris Greer as the general manager and the head coach in Brian Flores. And when Flores got there, he got a 6-year contract. So they wanted to be patient with him. I think they're going to stay patient with him. But if you look at what he's done there, they've had a turnstile at offensive coordinator ever since he got there. And the question really for me now becomes will they get so desperate to the point where they actually try to pull off a Deshaun Watson trade? So, we know that Houston hasn't been willing to do it unless they're able to get the full maximum value. But so far, it really hasn't been working for Miami. And not to mention also, they don't have their own first-round pick next year because of that trade that they did in the offseason where they moved from 3 to 12 and then back up to 6. They decided to give up their own first-round pick instead of the 49ers first-round pick. And right now, that pick stands at number 2 overall, and it's sitting in Philadelphia's hands. So all that is going on. And then lastly, if this keeps on going the way it is, it's going to be interesting because their owner, Stephen Ross, as I said, he wanted to be patient with this regime. The problem is it really hasn't been going well. And Ross is 81 years old, and he wants to see some sort of success with this team. And it's fair to wonder if his patience at some point runs out because we've seen it happen before with him.
Yeah, I think you covered a lot there. So I'll just, touch on one point that I think is key is that this is a bit anecdotal, but I think this is why when people discuss head coaching jobs and they talk about offense versus defense, I like Flores. I think Flores is a good coach. But you mentioned the carousel offensive coordinator. They have like co-offensive coordinators this year. They already had a safety from throwing a screen pass in the end zone against the Raiders. I think that was week 4. They almost did it again this week against Jacksonville. They were on the 1-yard line in shotgun with Tua taking his sweet time in the end zone. I was screaming at my TV at 9:45 a.m. with my wife, wants to kill me. But I'm sitting there like, how are you still making these same mistakes, stuff like that? And yeah, I mean, their season's over. And I think they're also, one interesting point too is they're that group with Washington and some others where it can be kind of a curse to be ahead of schedule, because now it looks so bad where if they went 8-8 last year, would we be kind of panicking as much as they go 10-6? Yes, they missed the playoffs. But anyways, the year is about, like you said, maybe Deshaun Watson. And then does Tua start week 1, 2022? And is Flores and Greer here week 1, 2022? Or are they making the draft picks we had this year? That's kind of, the whole year. That's all they have left to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, you guys talked about the offensive coordinator situation. Just to go through that a little bit, right off the top, they had Jim Caldwell as a quarterbacks coach as well. He left the team after only a few months because of health concerns, but then he did not return the next season. They had Chad O'Shea as their offensive coordinator the first year in 2019. He only lasted 1 year. Then they get Chan Gailey in there, and that's when you draft your quarterback in Tua Tagovailoa. You want him to be attached to that offensive coordinator for years. Chan Gailey only lasts 1 season, and now, like you guys said, you got George Godsey and Eric Stootsville as your co-offensive coordinators. And once again, you're tying that to that young quarterback. And George Godsey, he's been around the NFL for a while, but he's not exactly that hot up-and-coming offensive coordinator that you hitch your wagon to. He only lasted a couple of years with the Houston Texans as their offensive coordinator. Then he dropped back down to a position coach, and now he's in this co-offensive coordinator situation. So it's something that just really hasn't stuck for them at this point. And last year was the year to get in that hot new offensive coordinator to tie to Tua. That didn't happen, and now we see what we're dealing with at this point here. Let's move on to another team with some issues, especially at quarterback, and that's the Detroit Lions with Dan Campbell and Jared Goff. Dan Campbell made some very interesting comments about Jared Goff after their loss on Sunday. Let's cue up the video there so you can see what he actually said about their starting quarterback.
I will say this. I still don't feel like we can accurately judge him one way or another. I don't feel that way yet. Now, I will say this. I feel like he needs to step up more than he has. And I think he needs to help us, just like everybody else. And I think he's going to need to put a little bit of weight on his shoulders here, and it's time to step up, make some throws, and do some things. And
it was a extremely long pause from Dan Campbell before he really got into the message there. And this statement to me comes down to twofold. First of all, I do think to some degree it is unfair to fully judge Jared Goff based on what the Detroit Lions are putting out there on offense. Just to tell you guys, Quintez Cephas was out of this game. So the Lions and Tyrell Williams still out with a concussion. Their wide receivers in this game were Khalif Raymond, Kaderil Hodge, Tom Kennedy, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Geronimo Allison. I really wonder if, and no offense to any of those players, if there's a single wide receiver that played on Sunday that would even be in the top 3 on another team, let alone top 2. Top 2, no chance. Top 3, I really doubt it. And these are guys who have bounced around the NFL. They haven't started in other places. You look at a team like the Chicago Bears, they've at least got Damiere Byrd as their number 3. He's a guy who started a lot of games before. So I don't want to get too deep into defending Jared Goff, but I mean, I covered the Patriots for a long time. In 2019, it was a rough situation for Tom Brady with the quarterbacks that he was throwing to. And Tom Brady struggled that season. He goes to Tampa Bay the next year. He's got the best wide receivers in the NFL. His stats skyrocket. And if you look at Tom Brady's stats throughout his career, year by year, you can tell when he's got a good receiver core because his stats are much better. You saw it in 2013 with him. His stats were way down there. His wide receivers were bad. 2006, his wide receivers were bad. I don't mean to compare Jared Goff and Tom Brady, but you have to consider what Jared Goff is playing with. That being said, I think that we all knew that Jared Goff was not going to be the answer for the Detroit Lions when they traded for him this offseason. So that should not come as that big of a surprise. But I mean, as Dan Campbell said off the top, you can't fully judge what's going on there based on everything else that's going on the Detroit Lions offense. Brad, what's your assessment of the situation?
Yeah, it's funny actually. You mentioned Khalif Raymond. I mean, just to illustrate, and again, we're not trying to pick on guys, and I actually think he's looked pretty good so far in Detroit. Yeah. Khalif Raymond was a restricted free agent. The Titans, who don't even have receiver depth, chose to just let go when they could have just put an original round tender on him for about $2 million. They chose to just let him go. He's a top option, this week for Detroit. So that just kind of illustrates, again, not picking on the guy, more just talent. It's not there. But I will say, to take it a little bit different angle, this could be totally speculation. Dan Campbell pausing for about 15 seconds to get his words together was amazing. I love that. But I think, what if there's an angle to it of they also realize they might not like anyone in this draft at quarterback, and they might be laying the groundwork of like, look, he's not been good, but we don't think anyone is better than him this year. So you might have to deal with another full season of Jared Goff in 2022. We'll have extra picks. Then maybe we'll make something happen. But maybe a little bit of that as well. Because, look, I'm not even saying they're wrong in that assessment because this class in the college is not good.
Brad, I think that is really what the plan was when they traded for Jared Goff. I think the best case scenario when they traded for him was he's going to be the guy. But they knew that was going to be unlikely. But what they really wanted was for him to hold it down for 2 years while the front office just adds a bunch of building blocks on this team. And then eventually they'll draft a quarterback and he'll walk into a situation where he has all these pieces ready for him. I think a team like Carolina has actually positioned themselves in a way to do that if Darnold isn't the guy. But I don't know if in their eyes, Goff has shown enough to be the guy for the next 2 years, let alone the rest of this season. But, I think what Dan Campbell said is right. And we didn't show the rest of the video, but he mentioned that it's not just Goff. He needs everyone else to step up as well. And that it hasn't happened as of now. But in reality is he's kind of been, stranded on an island out there because, as you guys said, these guys aren't starting for any other team. And the one thing that Goff had when he came to this team was the offensive line that we all thought was the biggest strength. They haven't been healthy either. So it's a really tough spot for him. So it's hard to put all the blame on him. But we've already seen Goff at his best with all the players there. He had it with the Rams, and he couldn't pull it off. So obviously it doesn't look like he's going to be the future in Detroit, but I think they really were hoping for him just to be the guy for 2 years. And now it's fair to wonder if that's even going to get there.
Yeah, just a really quick note. I mean, because these guys will always be compared, but Carson Wentz had a 94 PFF grade, one of the highest grades we've ever given at quarterback. I mean, yeah, the Texans are bad, but both of his ankles are hurt. His offensive line is missing a bunch of guys. They don't really have receivers either. So those excuses matter. But Wentz looked phenomenal on Sunday. So
true. Yeah.
Lions roster in general, I would say, is kind of in rough shape. I was doing some research for a story I might be writing this week, and they are actually the only team in the NFL who has started an undrafted free agent on offense or defense this season, and they've got 2 starting undrafted rookies in their secondary. So overall, I think that the expectations were not especially high for Detroit heading into this season, and they're living up to those low expectations. Let's talk about John Gruden and the Washington football team email situation. We're still basically at a point where there's 650,000 emails floating out there, and we've only seen the ones that are tied to John Gruden and Jeff Pash. Certainly an interesting situation. We don't really know who is leaking these emails, how they're getting out, what the motivation for getting those emails out is. One thing that I just want to touch on before I throw it to you guys is that I thought the Raiders showed a lot of resolve this week, beating the Denver Broncos in Denver, and there's many different layers to this story overall, but I felt very bad for the Raiders players last week heading into their game. It was a really tough situation. They lost a tough game, and for them to bounce back this week with Rich Bisaccia as their interim head coach, I just thought it was really impressive for them to be able to bounce back the way that they did heading into that game. But Ari, what's your read on the email situation overall that's going on right now?
Yeah, I mean, this whole story has been just fascinating to follow throughout, ever since it really started unfolding on Friday of last week when the first batch of emails came out on DeMaurice Smith. The thing for me really is that if you're an NFL fan, this should really be driving you crazy, because what John Gruden did is 100% wrong, and it's right that he's gone. That's right, 100%. The thing is, for him to be the guy who ended up being picked on in a Washington football team investigation should really be driving people crazy, because whoever is leaking this, and there's a strong belief it's the NFL, and they're saying it's not, but why were they specifically picking on John Gruden, and why did that happen? Whoever has these emails has so much power because he has 650,000 emails over a course of so many years from the Washington server, and who knows what else is in there, and they specifically targeted John Gruden. So I think just that should be concerning for people, and saying, hey, there are so many more emails here. There are so many emails from Bruce Allen, Dan Snyder, everyone else in Washington. There's a lot of allegations there. There's workplace misconduct. There's the whole cheerleader stuff. And we have no information on what's going on with that. And everyone is left looking around like, what is going on over here? And I thought what happened over the weekend, the Sean Taylor stuff, I know Washington is saying they've been working on it for months. For it just to come out 3 days before, and in a way, it looks like they're using his name, his legacy as a distraction to see what's going on in Washington. That is really, really wrong. And his own little brother came out and said he only found out about it earlier in the week. I thought that was very fishy. When those women all came out a few months back and spoke to the Washington Post, what happened a few days later? They changed their team name to the Washington football team to change the topic once again. They've been doing this over and over. And I think every NFL fan should really be bothered about this. It's a serious problem. We've only gotten emails about John Gruden and Jeff Pash and nothing on Washington. And there are some serious problems going on over there, and we've gotten nothing. And it looks like the NFL wants to keep it that way. And I think that's a serious, serious issue.
Yeah, and I think the latest development I saw in the story was essentially that their rationale as to why they had to not release more is that there were some confidential providers of the information, so they're trying to protect them. But like you said, the selective leaking and all that, I mean, the thing is, Bruce Allen is kind of the cog in all of this. And also I saw Amy Trask, who is, former president of the Raiders, probably one of the more respected people like in this entire kind of league, ecosystem, said that when he was with the Raiders, she was not a fan of his, at all, and wanted him out of there. And so he's connected to all the emails, even with Adam Schefter. I mean, you were taking shots at Schefter as well. All of it comes back to Bruce Allen in Washington. We know that organization has been a disaster for 20 some odd years under Dan Snyder. And like you said, we're dealing with these other kind of auxiliary things that, look, are still unfortunate and still should have happened and all that. But yeah, the final piece, like you mentioned, the Sean Taylor thing was really, really, truly heartbreaking. If you saw, I mean, the ceremony at halftime was not very, developed or anything like that. Dan Snyder was wearing a sweatshirt when he went to meet with the family before the game, and they put up a street sign to, Sean Taylor Way. And the picture I saw, it's his family standing in front of a bunch of porta potties, and that's where the street sign was erected. And it's embarrassing because it probably is just to cover up, this bad press they've received. So.
Yeah, for sure. And I do find it interesting that the only emails that have come out have been John Gruden, Jeff Pash, a former employee of the Washington football team, and Adam Schefter. Nothing tied to current employees of the Washington football team. Let's talk about another quarterback here, and that's Cam Newton. He came out on Sunday, said that he has gotten vaccinated and that he has received offers. I would assume that means from NFL teams. And then Pete Carroll came out this morning and said that the Seahawks did speak to Cam Newton after Russell Wilson went down. He essentially made it sound like they were kind of doing due diligence, talking to a lot of different people. Obviously, the Seahawks did not wind up signing Cam Newton before Sunday night's game against the Steelers. They did roll with Geno Smith. But I do think that this situation and whether or not they decided to add another quarterback, and if that's Cam Newton, it depends largely on just how long they expect Russell Wilson to be out for. Because if it's only for a couple more games, then they could probably weather the storm with Geno Smith as their starting quarterback, get Russell Wilson back, and then see what they can salvage of the season. The other element here, to me, is that you roll with Geno Smith as your backup quarterback for years, knowing that if something happens to Russell Wilson, you're going to have to turn to Geno Smith. Now Russell Wilson goes down, and you're calling Cam Newton. I'm not sure how serious the conversations are, but what's the point in grooming Geno Smith as that backup quarterback and carrying him for as long as you have and not trying to add someone else at some point if you're just going to turn to another quarterback once Russell Wilson goes down? So I'm not sure how this situation shakes out, but I do think that Geno Smith was at least good enough on that Sunday night game that it's worth seeing what they have from him for at least a one more game. But Ari, what do you think the Seahawks wind up doing? And what do you think happens with Cam Newton overall this season?
Well, first of all, Cam just coming out and getting the vaccine and announcing that is a bit of a big deal because his chances of just getting on a team just went up drastically. There's no more 5-day waiting period after he signs. You sign, you're there, you're on the practice field, get started. So that, first of all, is a big deal. But what Seattle ends up doing is an interesting conversation because, as you said, they've had Geno Smith for a while. Russell Wilson has really been Iron Man. He never gets hurt. And now they're in that situation where he is hurt. And, if Geno gets hurt, then who's the guy? It's Jake Luton, who they just got from Jacksonville's practice squad. So, and I'm sure they probably don't want him out there. So it might be more of a, let's get another veteran into this locker room. And in case something happens to Geno, let's have him out there instead of somebody who we just added off a practice squad from another team. But, it's interesting with Cam because he said he's gotten offers. From my understanding, he actually has not gotten any offers at all so far. So he's still out there. He wants to get in the league. But it's interesting because if you look around the NFL, how many teams actually have a solid backup behind their current starter? And I think that's worth monitoring because, as we get closer to the playoffs, knowing that there's an 18-week season this year, it might be worth it to add a quarterback who has some starting experience just to have him on your bench in case the worst possible outcome does happen to your quarterback, just like Philadelphia had a few years ago of Carson Wentz and Nick Foles was able to come in. I think it's worth having that guy there as the backup. And who knows, that could end up being a guy like Cam Newton. And as I said, now that he's gotten vaccinated, his chances of actually ending up on a roster is far higher than where it was a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I think it's a good point to where at this point in the season, it might be context where a team might say, hey, look, let's wait to see if, let's say you're the Dallas Cowboys who do not have a backup quarterback on the roster. Maybe they were saying in week 2, they're saying, look, let's see how the season starts. If we're 2-3 in week 5, we're not going to go spend more money on bringing in a backup. Now they're 5-1 heading into the bye. Dak should be okay, but did have a little bit of a calf injury. Then maybe you look and say, look, we cannot afford. They have a couple of easy games coming out of the bye as well. They do have the Chiefs in week 10, but they have a couple of easy games before that. If they say, look, Dak might miss 1 week, I would still argue with one playoff bye, you're in the NFC East, so you have all these games against bad NFC East teams later on. Cam starting one game in week 8 or whatever it is, and winning that game versus, Garrett Gilbert or Cooper Rush going out there and struggling could make or break you getting the bye. So I think it's something to monitor for sure. There are still a bunch of teams. Obviously, Seattle comes to mind. And with Seattle, the interesting thing might be if they bring him in, are they looking at him for 2022 because Russell might want out again? Or are they giving him a bit of a trial run to see, kind of what he can do? So it could be interesting in Seattle.
It's a great point.
Falcons, Jets, Lions. I know that some of these teams aren't really going to be competitive, but a lot of teams without ideal quarterback situations. Let's talk about, just to finish this off, surprise players of the week, guys who really stood out to us, who maybe weren't starting in week 1, maybe kind of came out of nowhere to play really well this week. And I'll kick it off. I know we've talked a lot about the Seattle already, but running back Alex Collins, I thought that he was really impressive last night against the Steelers. And one thing that stood out to me was just how much Pete Carroll really praised his performance after that game. He ran for 117 yards, 70 of which came after contact, 3.3 yards after contact per attempt. He had 4 runs of 10 plus yards. This is an interesting situation moving forward. However, Chris Carson on injured reserve with that neck injury. He will be out at least 2 more games. Alex Collins also did get banged up in that game. Pete Carroll said that he got hit on the hip, got hit in the glute, was not on the field there on the final drive in overtime. Travis Homer and DJ Dallas were on the field, but then Seattle's also getting back Rashad Penny. Pete Carroll said that he's going to be full go in his return off of injured reserve. So it's a situation where that Chris Carson's not going to be there for a couple of more games, but you don't know who that starting running back is going to be. I do think that if Collins is healthy, they'll probably keep rolling with Collins. But if he's not, then it becomes a really interesting situation between Penny, Dallas, and Homer. Maybe it's finally that Rashad Penny breakout week that we've all been expecting since he was taken in the first round of the 2018 NFL draft. I somehow kind of doubt that, but I did think that Collins played really well, especially against a tough Steelers defense for Seattle. Brad, who was your surprise player of the week?
Yeah, so I actually, it's funny. I was watching tape trying to get ready for tonight, and it's my choice for this topic is Spencer Brown, who's going to be the right tackle for the Bills tonight. And so I wanted to go back and watch him because I was fascinated by this decision. The Bills decided they signed Darrell Williams at right tackle in free agency, coming off a really strong year last year. He had played right guard in the past, and they were having some issues, and they wanted to get their 5 best offensive linemen on the field. So they slid Darrell Williams on the inside. This 6'8", about 300-pound Spencer Brown played at Northern Iowa last year. He was a 3rd-round pick, and I'm not an offensive line expert, but he started the last 2 weeks, and I thought he looked really good. Like the speed wasn't too much for him coming out of Northern Iowa, and I think tonight will be really interesting going up against Harold Landry and Bud Dupree in Tennessee. How will he hold up? How will that Buffalo offense look against a vulnerable defense?
Spencer Brown, 6'8", 311, ran a 6'9'6" 3-cone drill. One of the freakiest pro days I've probably ever seen. Ari, who's your surprise player of the week?
I'm going to go with a guy who, if you play fantasy, I'm sure you've heard of him, but I just want to put a spotlight on the player. It's Khalil Herbert, the Bears running back, which I found his story to be just fascinating. He was a 0-star recruit out of high school, was in Kansas, transferred to Virginia Tech, and then just went crazy as soon as he got there. Ends up being drafted by the Bears in the 6th round, and he enters a team where they already have Montgomery, and they signed Damian Williams, and they'll eventually get back to Tariq Cohen. But here we are in week 6, and all those guys are out, and Herbert is going off once again, just like he did at Virginia Tech. Yesterday, he had 20 carries, 113 yards. He had a rushing touchdown. I know it was in a loss to Green Bay, but the week before, he had 75 rushing yards in the win over Las Vegas. He's looking like a home run pick in the 6th round, and I know many fans in Chicago, they bashed Ryan Pace, and I know he's made some bad decisions there, but Herbert, he looks amazing. His story is awesome, knowing where he came from as a 0-star recruit, like I said. I think that's pretty awesome, and he's been taking advantage of his opportunities so far. He's been really fun to watch.
Absolutely. We'll see how much longer he can get those opportunities because Williams might be coming back. David Montgomery on injured reserve right now, but definitely a great story there in Khalil Herbert. That will do it for this week's PFF Live Q&A. Keep it on PFF.com for all of your NFL information, statistics, analysis, news, everything. Follow Ari on Twitter at MySportsUpdate. Follow Brad on Twitter at Brad_PFF. Throw me a follow at Doug Kyed, and we will be back with you guys again next week.